Beneath the gleaming crystal chandeliers of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant, a world of power and privilege played out every night. Here, deals worth millions were sealed with a handshake, and reputations were made or broken over a glass of vintage wine. But on one particular evening, this carefully curated world was brought to a screeching halt. The aggressor, Sterling Blackwood, a titan of industry, a man whose net worth eclipsed the GDP of small nations. The target, a young waitress. As his voice laced with venom and entitlement echoed through the opulent dining room, no one could have predicted what would happen next. It wasn't a rebuttal, an apology, or a burst of tears. It was a single sentence spoken with chilling calm that would not only freeze the entire restaurant, but would unravel an empire and expose a devastating secret buried for years. The air in Aurelia was thick with the scent of money and ambition. It was a carefully composed fragrance, a blend of white truffle oil, vintage leather from the banquettes, and the subtle, expensive perfumes of its clientele. Waitstaff moved like ghosts, their black and white uniforms, a stark contrast to the jewel-toned silks and bespoke suits of the patrons. They were trained to be invisible, to anticipate a need before it was spoken, to refill a glass of water without a single ripple. For Isabella Rossi, this performance of invisibility was both a shield and a burden. Tonight, like every Tuesday and Thursday for the past 6 months, she was assigned to Section 4, the coveted corner booths, with the best view of the glittering city skyline. It was also, unfortunately, the preferred section of Sterling Blackwood. Isabella had studied him from afar, learning his habits with the meticulous precision of a biologist studying a predator. He always arrived at precisely 8 o'clock. He always demanded the corner booth even if another party was already seated there, a request the manager, Mr. Dubois, would always accommodate, with groveling apologies to the displaced guests. He drank Macallan 25 neat. He ordered the Wagyu steak medium rare and would send it back if it was even a degree off. He never made eye contact with the staff, referring to them only with a sharp snap of his fingers or a dismissive "you." To most, he was an icon. His face graced the covers of business magazines, a testament to his Midas touch. Blackwood Capital was a behemoth, a private equity firm that specialized in corporate restructuring, a euphemism for acquiring struggling companies, stripping them for parts and leaving the husks behind. He was lauded as a visionary, a ruthless but brilliant capitalist. Isabella knew another word for it, a vulture. Her hands steady as she polished a wine glass until it squeaked did not betray the tremor in her heart. Every time he was here, it was a test of her resolve. She had fought to get this job, navigated the complex social hierarchies of the restaurant world, and endured the condescension of Mr. Dubois, all for these moments. All for the chance to be in the same room as the man who had obliterated her world. Tonight, Sterling Blackwood was accompanied by a younger man, Gregory Finch, a junior partner at his firm. Gregory was everything Sterling was, but in a less refined package. His suit was just as expensive, but worn with less ease. His laughter was a fraction too loud, his sycophantic nods too eager. He was a mirror reflecting Sterling's own ego back at him, and Sterling clearly enjoyed the view. "The board is weak, Gregory." Sterling was saying, his voice a low growl that carried easily in the hushed room. "They talk about long-term stability and employee morale. Morale doesn't show up on a balance sheet. We buy Aerotech, we liquidate the pension fund, sell the patents to the Chinese, and we're out in 6 months with a 40% return. It's clean. It's simple." Gregory nodded vigorously. "Absolutely, Sterling. Visionary. They're stuck in the past." Isabella approached the table, her water pitcher held in a perfectly steady hand. "Good evening, gentlemen. May I refill your water?" she asked, her voice a neutral practice melody. Sterling didn't look at her. He waved a dismissive hand, a gesture that meant, "Do your job and disappear." Gregory, however, let his eyes linger on her for a moment too long, a slick smile playing on his lips. Isabella ignored him, focusing on the task. She leaned forward to pour water into Sterling's glass. And then it happened. A tiny, almost imperceptible tremor, a result of the adrenaline coursing through her veins, caused the lip of the heavy crystal pitcher to gently tap the rim of his glass. A single drop of chilled water escaped, landing on the back of Sterling Blackwood's $5,000 suit sleeve. It was nothing. A speck of moisture that would evaporate in 60 seconds. In any other context with any other person, it would have gone unnoticed. But this was Sterling Blackwood. The low growl of his conversation stopped. He looked down at the microscopic droplet on his sleeve as if it were a mortal wound. He slowly, deliberately lifted his gaze from his suit to Isabella's face. For the first time all night, he truly looked at her. His eyes, the color of a stormy sea, were filled with a sudden, shocking rage. "You," he spat the word. "Did you see what you just did?" The silence at the table was instantaneous. Gregory Finch's sycophantic smile vanished, replaced by a look of alarm. Isabella kept her composure. "My deepest apologies, sir. It was a complete an accident." Sterling's voice rose, shedding its conversational tone, and taking on a sharp, cruel edge that sliced through the restaurant's ambient murmur. Heads at nearby tables began to turn. "An accident of incompetence. Do you have any idea what this suit costs? It costs more than you make in a year. Probably 5. Isabella stood frozen, the heavy pitcher still in her hand. Her training screamed at her to apologize, to grovel, to fetch the manager. But something else, a deeper, older anger, held her in place. "Sir, I am truly sorry. I will fetch a cloth immediately." "Don't bother," he sneered, his voice now loud enough to command the attention of the entire dining room. The clinking of cutlery slowed. Conversations faded. "What's your name?" he demanded. She hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Isabella, sir." "Isabella?" he repeated, tasting the name with theatrical disgust. "Well, Isabella, let me give you a lesson in value. Some things and some people are valuable. They are assets. And some," he gestured vaguely at her, "are liabilities. They are clumsy, inefficient, and ultimately disposable. You are a disposable person in a disposable job, and you just spilled water on someone who could buy this entire building and turn it into his private bathroom just for the pleasure of firing you personally." Gregory Finch chuckled nervously, a pathetic attempt to show solidarity. The other patrons stared, a mixture of shock, discomfort, and for a few, a kind of morbid curiosity. Mr. Dubois was already scurrying over from the host stand, his face pale and beaded with sweat. "Mr. Blackwood, sir, is there a problem?" He stammered, his eyes darting fearfully from Sterling's furious face to Isabella's still one. Sterling ignored him, his focus locked on Isabella. The full force of his personality, the same force that crushed corporate boards and terrified rivals, was now directed at a 24-year-old waitress. He was making an example of her. He was asserting his dominance in his kingdom. "You see this," he said, holding up his arm. "This is not just water. This is a symbol of the sloppiness and the absolute lack of respect that people like you have. You drift through life with no ambition, no drive, and you expect a handout. You expect to serve people like me and not even have the basic competence to do it properly. You are a waste of space." The venom in his words was palpable. It hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Isabella felt the stares of every single person in the room. She saw the fear in Mr. Dubois' eyes. She saw the cruel smirk on Sterling's face. He was enjoying this. He was feeding on her humiliation. Her training, her carefully constructed facade of the invisible waitress crumbled. The years of suppressed grief, of watching her mother cry herself to sleep, of seeing her father's pride turn to ash, it all coalesced into a single white-hot point of clarity. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind 1,000 times, but she had always imagined it differently. She had imagined shouting, crying, throwing the truth at him like a stone. But now, in the face of his raw public cruelty, she found a calm she didn't know she possessed. It was the calm of a deep, unshakable certainty. She lowered the water pitcher and placed it silently on the service tray next to the table. She straightened up, not in defiance, but with a sudden, profound dignity that seemed to make her taller. She looked Sterling Blackwood directly in the eye, her own gaze clear and steady. The entire restaurant, from the kitchen staff peeking through the doors to the wealthiest patrons in their booths, held its breath. Then she spoke. Her voice was not loud, but it carried across the stunned silence with absolute precision. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her tone devoid of fear or anger, a simple statement of fact. "The last time we spoke, you told my father his life savings were perfectly safe with you." The sentence landed in the opulent dining room of Aurelia, not like a shout, but like the silent, concussive blast of a bomb. For a full 3 seconds, the only sound was the faint hum of the city outside the panoramic windows. Every eye was locked on the tableau, the furious billionaire, the terrified manager, and the waitress who had just lit a fuse. Sterling Blackwood's face underwent a fascinating transformation. The florid mask of rage dissolved, replaced by a flicker of confusion, then a dawning, horrified recognition. His eyes, which had been instruments of attack, now became windows to a frantic search through the archives of his memory. He stared at her face, the dark, determined eyes, the strong line of her jaw. He was seeing her not as a disposable waitress, but as someone else. A ghost from a transaction he had long since buried. What did you say?" He stammered, his voice losing its thunderous authority, shrinking to a confused whisper. Mr. Dubois, utterly lost, looked back and forth between them. "Isabella, what is the meaning of this? Apologize to Mr. Blackwood at once and go to my office." But Isabella's attention was solely on Sterling. She had his full, undivided attention for the first time. "My father was Robert Rossi," she continued, her voice maintaining its unnerving calm. "Rossi and Sons Fine Cabinets. You met him at the Mayor's Charity Gala 4 years ago. You told him you had a special opportunity, an exclusive fund for friends and family? You told him it was a sure thing." The name Robert Rossi struck Sterling like a physical blow. He visibly flinched. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a pasty grayish pallor. The swagger, the entitlement, the sheer force of his presence evaporated, leaving only a man suddenly looking older and far more fragile, caught in a spotlight he couldn't escape. Gregory Finch, the sycophant, was a study in confusion. He looked at his boss, whose godlike confidence had vanished, and then at the waitress who now seemed to hold all the power in the room. He opened his mouth, then closed it, utterly clueless as to which side to take. The other diners were no longer just watching. They were listening intently. The hushed whispers started rippling outwards from the center. Phones which had been discreetly tucked away began to emerge. A few were already pointed toward the scene, their small red recording lights blinking like malevolent eyes. I don't know what you're talking about," Sterling finally managed, but the denial was weak-hollow. It convinced no one, least of all himself. "You don't," Isabella asked, a faint, sad smile touching her lips. "He trusted you. He invested everything. Not just the company's capital, but our home equity, my college fund. All of it. He called your office every day for 6 months. When the statements stopped coming, he left messages for you. Do you remember any of his messages, Mr. Blackwood? Or were they disposable and too?" This was no longer a disgruntled employee. This was an accusation, sharp and specific, being leveled in one of the most public arenas in New York City. This was a story with a hook, and everyone in the room was leaning in. Mr. Dubois finally found his voice high-pitched with panic. "That's enough, security," he squeaked, gesturing wildly towards the entrance. "Get her out of here." But before any security could arrive, Isabella took a small step back from the table. She looked away from Sterling, her gaze sweeping across the room at the sea of shocked faces at the recording phones. She had done what she came to do. She had planted the seed. "You can fire me, Mr. Dubois," she said, her voice clear and resonant. "But you should all ask him what happened to the Blackwood Horizon Fund. You should ask him what happened to all the families who invested in it." With that, she unbuttoned her crisp white apron, the symbol of her servitude, and folded it neatly. She placed it on her now empty service tray. She gave one last look at the shell-shocked billionaire, then turned and walked with her head held high, not towards the manager's office, but straight towards the main entrance of the restaurant. The patrons parted for her as if she were royalty, their faces a mixture of awe and pity. The silence held until the heavy glass doors swung shut behind her, leaving a bomb of a story detonated in her wake. Sterling Blackwood remained frozen in his seat, his steak growing cold, his whiskey untouched. His mind was a maelstrom. Robert Rossi. The name echoed, bringing with it the fuzzy memory of a portly, earnest man with calloused hands and a proud smile talking about his daughter, who was going to be a lawyer, a small-time cabinet maker. Easy prey. The Horizon Fund had been one of his most discreetly predatory ventures, a shell corporation designed to absorb capital from non-accredited, sophisticated investors he'd met at social functions, investors who wouldn't have the resources to fight back. It was funneled through a series of offshore accounts before the fund inevitably collapsed, declared bankrupt. It was a perfect, untraceable slaughter, or so he had thought. Sterling, what was she talking about? Gregory asked, his voice now laced with genuine concern. The lion he served had been wounded, and he didn't know how. Sterling slammed his hand on the table, making the crystal jump. It's nothing, she's a lunatic, a disgruntled, lying little... But the energy was gone. He looked around the room and saw not deference but suspicion. He saw the phones. He felt the shift in power. He had built an empire on the perception of invincibility, and a waitress with a single memory had just put a crack in its foundation. He threw his napkin onto the table. We're leaving. He stood up, trying to recapture his former stature, but he seemed diminished. He strode towards the exit, Gregory scrambling behind him. He didn't wait for the valets. He stormed out into the cool night air, the cacophony of New York City, a welcome relief from the suffocating silence of the room he'd just fled. Back inside Aurelia, the spell was broken. A low roar of conversation erupted. The video clips were already being uploaded, tagged with Billionaire Brawl, Aurelia Showdown, and most intriguingly, Blackwood Horizon Fun. One diner, a sharp-eyed woman in her late 30s, sitting alone with a laptop, watched him go with a predatory gleam in her eye. She was Penelope Vance, an investigative journalist for an online publication called The Gavel. She had built her career on taking down untouchable men. She had come to Aurelia tonight to work on a completely different story, but now a much bigger one had just fallen into her lap. She had recorded the entire exchange. She beckoned her waiter. "Check, please." She said, her fingers already flying across her keyboard, typing a name into her publication's secure database, Robert Rossi. Meanwhile, Isabella Rossi walked down Park Avenue, the city lights blurring through the tears she had refused to shed inside. She didn't feel triumphant. She didn't feel vindicated. She just felt a profound, hollow emptiness. The first part of her plan was complete, but she knew with chilling certainty that this was only the beginning. She had poked the hornet's nest. Now she had to prepare for the swarm. She clutched the strap of her worn handbag, inside of which lay her father's old leather-bound journal and a tarnished silver USB stick. It wasn't just a memory she had, it was proof. The aftermath of the Aurelia incident was swift and brutal. By the time Isabella reached her small third-floor walk-up in Astoria, Queens, the video was already spreading like wildfire across social media. It was grainy, shot from a low angle, but the audio was horribly clear. Sterling Blackwood's booming, arrogant tirade. Her own quiet, devastating reply. The clip, just under 2 minutes long, was an explosive cocktail of class warfare, public humiliation, and tantalizing mystery. She unlocked the door to the apartment she shared with her mother, Maria. The space was small but impeccably clean, filled with the lingering scent of garlic and oregano. The furniture was old but well cared for, a mix of items they'd managed to salvage and cheap replacements. The only truly fine pieces were a small, intricately carved bookshelf and a coffee table in the living room, the last remaining works of Robert Rossi. Maria was sitting at the small kitchen table, her reading glasses perched on her nose, a pile of medical bills spread before her. She looked up as Isabella entered, her face etched with a permanent worry that had settled in 4 years ago. "Bella, you're home early," she said, her voice soft. "Is everything all right?" Isabella couldn't bring herself to speak. She walked over to her mother, knelt down and buried her face in her lap, the composure she had so carefully maintained finally shattering. The sobs came in ragged, painful bursts. Maria, startled, began stroking her daughter's hair, murmuring comforting words in a mixture of English and Italian. "My love, what is it? What happened? Did you lose your job?" Isabella finally lifted her head, her face streaked with tears. "I quit, Mama, or I was fired. I don't know. I saw him. Maria's hand stilled. She didn't need to ask who he was. There was only one he who cast such a long, dark shadow over their lives. "Blackwood," she whispered the name like a curse. "He was there," Isabella choked out. "He yelled at me. He humiliated me in front of everyone. So I said it. I told him who I was." Maria's face went pale. The fear in her eyes was immediate and visceral. It was the fear of a person who had already lost everything and knew how much more could still be taken. "Isabella, no. What have you done, that man? He is powerful. He is dangerous. To provoke him, what more can he do to us?" Mama Isabella asked, a raw edge to her voice. He took Dad's company. He took our home. He took our savings. He took Dad's health. She gestured towards the pile of bills on the table, a testament to the massive heart attack Robert Rossi had suffered 6 months after his financial ruin, leaving him alive but frail, a shadow of the vibrant man he once was. What's left for him to take? Our peace, Maria said quietly. Our safety. Isabella stood up and walked to her room, returning with her father's old journal and the silver USB stick. She placed them on the table next to the bills. Peace is a luxury we can't afford, Mama. He thought we were nothing. He thought Dad was just some stupid woodworker he could cheat and forget about. He needed to be reminded. She opened the journal. Her father's handwriting, usually a strong, confident script, filled the pages. The early entries were full of hope. October 14th, met a titan tonight, Sterling Blackwood. Shook my hand. A real handshake firm. Told him about the business, about Bella starting law school. He seemed genuinely interested. Said he admired self-made men. November the 2nd, a call today. From Blackwood's office, an invitation. Talked about a private fund, the Horizon Fund. Said it was for people he respected. An honor. He used the word honor. The entries grew more excited, filled with figures and projections Sterling had apparently scribbled on a napkin for him. Then the tone began to shift. May 10th. The quarterly statement is late. Called Michael Chen my contact. He said there's a slight delay, standard administrative stuff. July 19th. Still nothing. Called Chen again. Voicemail. Left a message directly for Mr. Blackwood. I know he's a busy man, but a simple update would be courteous. September 5th. The line to Chen's office is disconnected. The main switchboard at Blackwood Capital won't put me through. They say they have no record of a Horizon Fund. A cold feeling in my stomach today. A very cold feeling. The last entry was almost illegible. The pen strokes shaky and desperate. He won't take my calls. It's all gone. Maria Bella. What have I done reading it again? Isabella felt the old wound tear open anew. This journal was her holy text, and the USB stick was her weapon. After her father's heart attack, a shattered Isabella had been packing up his office, a rented storage unit by then, and found the USB stick taped to the bottom of a drawer. On it was a single audio file. Her father had a habit of using a voice recorder for memos, and he had, by sheer chance or divine providence, recorded his final crucial phone call with Michael Chen, the representative from Blackwood's office. Meanwhile, across the city in a penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park, Sterling Blackwood was pacing like a caged animal. The Aurelia video was everywhere. His phone was blowing up with calls from his board members, his PR chief, and his lawyers. Kill it, he barked into his phone at his head of public relations, a woman named Victoria Thorne. I don't care how. Threaten lawsuits, pay off the platforms. I want every copy of that video erased from the internet by morning. Sterling, it's too late. Victoria's voice was strained. It's gone viral. It's on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. News outlets have picked it up. The Gavel just published an article. Sterling's blood ran cold. The Gavel and Penelope Vance were his worst nightmare. She was a bloodhound. What does it say? It's a full transcript of the exchange. They've identified the waitress as Isabella Rossi, daughter of Robert Rossi of the defunct Rossi & Sons Fine Cabinets. They're asking the same question she did. What is the Blackwood Horizon Fund? Sterling? What is the Blackwood Horizon Fund? It's nothing. A defunct C-Corp from years ago. A failed venture. It's irrelevant. He lied, his voice tight. It's not irrelevant if people believe you cheated a man out of his life savings and then verbally abused his daughter in public. Victoria shot back. The optics are catastrophic. The board is calling for an emergency meeting. You need to get ahead of this. We need to issue a statement. An apology. An apology? Sterling laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. I don't apologize. We crush this girl. Find out everything about her, where she lives, who she talks to. Dig up any dirt you can find. We'll paint her as an unstable, opportunistic liar looking for a payday. And the fund, my legal team will handle it. It was a high-risk investment vehicle. Disclosures were signed. It's all perfectly legal. Rossi was a fool who bet the farm and lost. It's the story of capitalism. He hung up and immediately dialed his chief counsel. I need a team on this Rossi girl. I want a full court press. Cease and desist. Defamation suit. I want her buried in legal filings until she can't breathe. And I want you to find out what, if anything, she has. He thought back to the girl's face. Isabella. There was no fear in her eyes. There was something else. A cold, burning purpose. It unnerved him more than any threat. He had built his world on the assumption that the Robert Rosses of the world were footnotes, collateral damage in the grand game of wealth creation. He never imagined a footnote could learn to write its own story. In another part of the city, Penelope Vance was staring at her screen, a triumphant smile on her face. Her initial article was just the appetizer. Tip-offs were already flooding her inbox. The name Blackwood Horizon Fund had shaken something loose. One email in particular stood out. The sender was anonymous. The subject line was simple. You're on the right track. The body of the message was even simpler. Rossi wasn't the only one. Look for the Phoenix Group LLC, Delaware. You'll find more ghosts there. Penelope's smile widened. She smelled blood in the water. She had the public spectacle, she had the victim, and now she had a thread. A thread that could unravel Sterling Blackwood's entire tapestry of lies. Her next call would be to a forensic accountant. Her second would be to try and find Isabella Rossi. The two women, one driven by a thirst for justice, the other by a thirst for the truth, were now on a collision course, and Sterling Blackwood was standing directly in their path. The morning after the Aurelia incident, Isabella's world had shrunk to the four walls of her apartment. Her phone buzzed incessantly with calls from unknown numbers and notifications from social media. She was a trending topic. To some, she was a hero, a working-class champion who spoke truth to power. To others, she was an opportunist, a schemer who had staged the confrontation for fame and money. News vans were parked on the street below, their cameras pointed up at her building like sniper rifles. She had become a prisoner in her own home. Maria, her face a mask of anxiety, paced the small living room. We should have left last night, she murmured. Gone to your aunt's in Jersey. Bella, this is out of control. Running is what he expects us to do. Mama, Isabella said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. It's what we did last time. We stayed quiet, we grieved, we disappeared. Look where it got us. A sharp, authoritative knock echoed from their front door. It wasn't the tentative rap of a neighbor. It was firm official. Maria gasped, her hand flying to her chest. The police! His lawyers! Isabella took a deep breath. Stay here. She walked to the door and looked through the peephole. A woman stood in the hallway. She was in her late 30s with sharp, intelligent eyes, an air of restless energy, and a no-nonsense trench coat. Isabella recognized her instantly from her profile picture online. It was Penelope Vance. Isabella hesitated. Part of her wanted to pretend no one was home, but she knew that Penelope Vance wasn't the type to give up easily. More importantly, she was the author of the one article that had treated her story with gravity instead of sensationalism. She unlatched the door and opened it a few inches. Isabella Rossi, Penelope asked, her voice direct, but not unkind. My name is Penelope Vance. I wrote the article for the Gavel. I know this is an insane time, but I need to talk to you. I think I can help. A lot of people want to help me right now, Isabella said warily. Most of them want to sell my story to a tabloid. I don't work for a tabloid, Penelope replied, meeting her gaze without flinching. I bring down men like Sterling Blackwood for a living. I believe you, and I think your father wasn't his only victim. But I need more than a viral video. I need your story, and I need whatever proof you have. There was something in Penelope's demeanor, a core of steel, a genuine intensity that cut through Isabella's fear. This wasn't a vulture circling. This was a hunter who had found a common enemy. Isabella opened the door wider and let her in. The meeting was tense at first. Maria watched from the kitchen, a silent, worried sentinel. Isabella was guarded, doling out the details of her father's story, piece by piece. She spoke of his pride, his trust, and the devastating speed with which his life's work had been erased. Penelope listened, never interrupting, her pen scratching away in a small notebook. When Isabella finished, Penelope looked up, her expression grim. He used a shell corporation called Phoenix Group LLC to manage the fund. Penelope stated, not as a question, but as a fact. Isabella's eyes widened. How did you know that? I got an anonymous tip last night. I had a forensic accountant I work with do a deep dive. The Blackwood Horizon Fund was a subsidiary of Phoenix. Phoenix was registered in Delaware, owned by another holding company in the Cayman Islands. It was a ghost. It raised $30 million from about a dozen small-time investors like your father over 2 years, invested it in high-risk junk bonds and derivatives, and then declared bankruptcy. The assets were pennies on the dollar. The paper trail is a labyrinth designed to be. So it's all legal, Isabella said, the hope in her chest deflating. It was just a bad investment. The bankruptcy was legal, Penelope corrected her. The way he solicited the investments may not have been. Did your father sign a prospectus, risk disclosures? He signed a thick stack of papers, Isabella admitted. He said Mr. Blackwood's associate assured him it was just standard procedure. But what did Blackwood tell him? Penelope pressed. What promises did he make in person? This was it, the moment of truth. Isabella looked at her mother, who gave a slight, fearful shake of her head. But Isabella knew there was no turning back. She retrieved the USB stick. My father recorded one of his last calls with the man from Blackwood's office, Michael Chen. She plugged the USB into Penelope's laptop. A moment later, a scratchy audio file began to play. Her father's voice, strained with anxiety, filled the small apartment. Robert Rossi's voice. Michael, it's Robert Rossi again. It's been 3 months. I just need to know what's happening. The market is up, but my statements show a total loss. Mr. Blackwood promised me this was a preservation fund. He said it was safer than a bank. Michael Chen's voice, smooth, condescending. Mr. Rossi, as we've discussed, all investments carry inherent risks. I'm sure Mr. Blackwood's comments were meant in the spirit of confidence, not as a literal guarantee. Robert Rossi's voice. A guarantee. He shook my hand and told me my daughter's college fund was safe with him. He said the Horizon Fund was insulated from market volatility. Those were his exact words. Michael Chen's voice. I have no record of that conversation. If you'll check the prospectus, you signed Section 11, subsection C, you'll see a clear acknowledgement of the potential for total loss of principal. Blackwood Capital is not liable for market downturns. The call ended with the click of a line disconnecting. The silence in the room was heavy. Penelope's eyes were blazing. He has a record of the conversation now, she whispered. This is it. This is the misrepresentation. Promising safety while the documents say the opposite is securities fraud. But it's my word against his, Isabella said, and the word of his lackey on a recording. Not just his, Penelope countered. I spent all night tracking down the other investors in the Phoenix Group, a retired teacher in Ohio who lost her pension, a family-run restaurant owner in Chicago, a doctor in Florida. They all tell the same story. Sterling Blackwood charmed them at a charity event or a golf club, sold them on a sure thing, and then they were handed off to Michael Chen to be bled dry. They were all too small, too isolated, and too ashamed to fight back. But now they have you. You're their voice. A new feeling began to dawn on Isabella, eclipsing the fear and the grief. It was a sense of purpose. She was no longer just fighting for her father. She was fighting for all of them. Just then a loud thud came from the front door as a thick envelope was slid underneath. Isabella picked it up. It was from a prestigious law firm, Blackwood's Legal Hounds. Inside was a cease and desist letter, thick with legalese threatening a multi-million-dollar defamation lawsuit. Maria wrung her hands. See, I told you. He's trying to crush us. Isabella looked at the letter, then at Penelope. She slid it across the table. He's scared, she said, a newfound confidence in her voice. He wouldn't be doing this if he wasn't scared. Penelope read the letter and smiled grimly. This isn't a threat. This is a confession. He's confirming the story is damaging him. We've got him on the run. She closed her laptop. Okay, here's the plan. My publication will back you legally. We'll protect you. I'm going to publish a follow-up piece with the stories of the other victims. We'll make Phoenix Group and Horizon Fund household names. But we need a final blow. The recording is good, but juries can be swayed. We need to get Blackwood himself on the record. He'll never talk to you, Isabella said. Not to me, no, Penelope agreed. But he's a narcissist. His ego is wounded. His reputation is under attack. His PR team will be pushing him to do a big softball interview on a major network to clear his name, to look powerful and in control again. A plan began to form in her eyes. And when he does that interview, Penelope said, a predatory glint in her eye, we're going to make sure he gets a surprise guest. The week that followed was a blur of calculated chaos. Penelope Vance, true to her word, unleashed a media blitz. Her follow-up article, The Ghosts of the Horizon Fund, went live on the gavel. It was a masterpiece of investigative journalism, weaving together the heartbreaking stories of the retired teacher, the Chicago restaurateur, and the Florida doctor. Each story echoed the Rossi's a chance encounter with a charming Sterling Blackwood, promises of safety and exclusivity, and then financial ruin. Penelope skillfully laid out the architecture of the Phoenix Group LLC, painting a clear picture of a predatory scheme designed to prey on the trusting and financially unsophisticated. The article didn't just report the news, it created a narrative of a billionaire predator and his forgotten victims. The story exploded. Ghosts of Horizon trended globally. Mainstream news outlets, initially hesitant, could no longer ignore the story. The SEC announced a preliminary inquiry into Blackwood Capital's past fund management practices. The stock of Blackwood's publicly traded holding company dipped, then slid. The board members who had once revered Sterling as a rainmaker were now in open revolt, demanding he contain the situation. For Sterling Blackwood, it was a living nightmare. His fortress of wealth and power, once impenetrable, was being besieged from all sides. The cease and desist had backfired spectacularly. Penelope Vance had published it in full, framing it as an attempt to silence victims. His usual tactics, threats, legal intimidation, backroom deals were useless against the tide of public opinion. His PR chief, Victoria Thorne, was frantic. "You have to do the interview, Sterling," she insisted during a heated meeting in his marble-clad office. "We've arranged it with MBS Nightly News. Catherine Riley, she's tough but fair. You go on there, you look sincere. You express regret that these investors lost money in a volatile market. You pivot. You talk about the thousands of jobs you've created, your philanthropy. You change the narrative. You have to." Sterling hated the idea. It felt like a surrender. But he looked at his plummeting stock ticker and the stack of messages from his panicked board, and he knew he had no choice. He was a shark who had to keep moving, and right now he was dead in the water. "Fine," he snarled. "Book it, but no surprises. I want a list of approved topics. No mention of Rossi." "They won't agree to that," Victoria said. "But we can prep you. We'll have answers for everything." He agreed, convinced he could outsmart any journalist. He could project confidence, power, and a touch of regretful wisdom. He would turn this crisis into a demonstration of his resilience. The night of the interview, the atmosphere at the NBS studio was electric. Sterling Blackwood, dressed in a somber navy suit, sat opposite Catherine Riley, one of America's most respected journalists. He felt a bead of sweat trickle down his back, but kept his expression cool and confident. The cameras rolled. The first 15 minutes went exactly as planned. Catherine asked about the market, about his company's future, about his philanthropic work. Sterling was smooth, eloquent, and commanding. He was rebuilding his image brick by brick in front of millions of viewers. Then Catherine's expression hardened slightly. "Mr. Blackwood, I have to turn to the controversy that's been surrounding you for the past week. The story that began with a confrontation in a restaurant and has now grown to include multiple families across the country. I'm talking about the Blackwood Horizon Fund." Sterling leaned back, his expression a well-rehearsed mask of solemnity. "Catherine, it's a deeply unfortunate situation. The Horizon Fund was a high-risk, high-reward venture from nearly 5 years ago. Every investor, including Mr. Rossi, signed comprehensive documents acknowledging these risks. It pains me that it didn't succeed and that people lost money. It's a painful part of investing, but it is a part of it. But these investors claim you personally assured them of the fund's safety," Catherine pressed. "They claim you sold it to them as a secure investment for their life savings, for their children's college funds." "I meet hundreds of people a year," Sterling said smoothly, a touch of sadness in his voice. "I am passionate about what I do, and perhaps my enthusiasm was sometimes misinterpreted as a guarantee, which it never was. The documents, the legal reality are clear. He was doing it. He was winning." Catherine held his gaze. "Mr. Blackwood, one of those investors, was Robert Rossi. His daughter Isabella was the waitress you confronted at Aurelia. She claims her father has a recording of your representative explicitly contradicting the promises you made. She agreed to join us tonight. Please welcome Isabella Rossi. The studio doors opened. Sterling Blackwood's heart stopped. He turned his face a mask of pure, unadulterated shock as Isabella walked onto the set. She wasn't wearing a waitress uniform. She was dressed in a simple dark blazer and slacks, looking not like a victim, but like the law student she was always meant to be. She sat down in the chair next to Catherine, her calm gaze locking onto Sterling's. He was trapped. The cameras were on him. Millions were watching. If he stormed off, he was guilty. If he stayed, he was facing his accuser. Ms. Rossi, Catherine said, her voice gentle. Thank you for being here. Mr. Blackwood claims his enthusiasm was simply misinterpreted. What do you say to that? Isabella looked directly at Sterling. Enthusiasm is not the word I would use, she said, her voice clear and strong. Fraud is more accurate. You didn't sell my father on high risk, high reward. You sold him on safety. You sold him on trust. You used his respect for you to rob him. This is a lie, Sterling blustered, finding his voice. This is a preposterous orchestrated attack. She is a disgruntled. Then let's listen to the recording, shall we? Catherine interjected. She signaled to the control room. The audio filled the studio. The voice of a desperate Robert Rossi, the condescending tones of Michael Chen. The key phrases echoed with damning clarity. Mr. Blackwood promised me this was a preservation fund, safer than a bank, insulated from market volatility. When the recording finished, the studio was deathly quiet. Catherine turned back to Sterling. Your representative, Michael Chen, did not deny that you made those statements, Mr. Blackwood. He simply referred to the fine print. Does that sound like a simple misinterpretation of enthusiasm? Sterling was cornered, his carefully constructed facade shattered. He lashed out. This is illegal, recording a call without consent. Not in New York, a one-party consent state, Isabella said coolly. My father was a party to the call. It's admissible. He stared at her, this girl he had dismissed as disposable, and saw the architect of his ruin. The final pieces of his composure crumbled. You people! He spat, his voice trembling with rage, forgetting the millions watching. You think you're entitled to a world with no risk. You make a bad bet, and you want someone else to blame. Your father was a weak, foolish man who didn't read what he signed. He is to blame for his own failure. The moment the words left his mouth, he knew it was over. The cruelty, the lack of empathy, the raw, ugly truth of his character was laid bare for the world to see. He hadn't just admitted his callousness. He had confirmed the very arrogance that started the whole affair. Isabella didn't flinch. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, a tear not of sadness, but of closure. My father was not weak, Mr. Blackwood, she said, her voice thick with emotion but unwavering. He was trusting. He believed that a man's word, a man's handshake, meant something. His only failure was believing you were a man of honor. That's a mistake I and all these other families will never make again. The interview ended. The fallout was immediate and absolute. The next morning, the board of Blackwood Capital forced Sterling Blackwood to resign. The SEC elevated its inquiry to a full-blown investigation. Class action lawsuits were filed on behalf of the Horizon Fund investors, with Isabella's recording and Penelope's articles as the central pillars of their case. Sterling Blackwood, the titan, had fallen. He was not brought down by a corporate rival or a market crash, but by the quiet dignity of a daughter who refused to let her father's story be forgotten. Isabella Rossi never saw a dime of the money her family had lost. It was long gone, vanished into the ether of offshore accounts. But she had won something far more valuable. She had restored her father's name. She had found justice for the forgotten victims. And she had found her own voice. A few months later, she re-enrolled in law school, her tuition paid for by a scholarship fund set up by an anonymous donor, though she had a strong suspicion it came from the coffers of a certain investigative news publication. She was no longer just Robert Rossi's daughter. She was Isabella Rossi, a name that for a brief, startling moment had brought an empire to its knees. A year later, the world was a different place. The scent of white truffle oil and expensive leather had been replaced by the dry, sweet smell of aging paper and old coffee that permeated the library of Columbia Law School. For Isabella Rossi, it was the most comforting fragrance in the world. The hushed whispers here were not of stock prices and leveraged buyouts, but of torts and precedents. This was a place where rules mattered, where arguments were built on logic and evidence, not on volume and intimidation. She sat under the dim glow of a reading lamp, a thick constitutional law textbook open before her. But her focus wasn't on the page. She was watching a mock trial practice session in a glass-walled room nearby. A fellow student playing the role of a corporate defendant was being cross-examined. He was slick, confident, and dismissive, a pale imitation of the man who had inadvertently set her on this path. Isabella felt no anger watching him, only a cool, analytical detachment. She saw the weaknesses in his testimony, the tells in his body language, the threads of his argument that could be unraveled with a single, well-placed question. She was no longer a victim of that world. She was learning to become its master. Her phone buzzed softly on the table. It was a news alert from a feed she still followed. Sterling Blackwood agrees to $40 million settlement in Horizon Fund class action lawsuit. Former CEO avoids jail time, but is barred from the securities industry for life. She read the headline without triumph. There was no joy in it, only a quiet finality. The money after the lawyers took their significant cut would be distributed among the dozen families. It wouldn't make them whole, but it was an admission, a price tag placed on their pain. Blackwood himself was a ghost. His penthouse had been sold to cover legal fees. He was last seen by paparazzi in Switzerland, a stooped figure with haunted eyes, a king dethroned and exiled, stripped of the only thing that ever gave him meaning, his power. Penelope Vance had written the final story, detailing how Gregory Finch was disbarred for his complicity and now sold luxury cars in a suburban dealership. Mr. Dubois had been quietly let go from Aurelia a month after the incident, a casualty of the brand damage he had tried so desperately to prevent. The restaurant itself had rebranded, trying to wash away the stain of that night. Isabella closed the news alert. Her personal victory had never been about his ruin, but about her family's restoration. She packed her books, the weight of the bag on her shoulder, a satisfying burden. She arrived home to the apartment in Astoria, which felt less like a refuge now and more like a home. The pile of medical bills was gone, replaced by a vase of fresh flowers her mother now bought every week. Maria was in the kitchen, humming along to the radio, the lines of worry on her face softened by time and peace. Isabella walked out onto their small balcony, where her father Robert sat in a comfortable chair, a block of soft pine and a carving knife in his hands. His recovery had been slow, his body still frail, but the light had returned to his eyes. The shame that had stooped his shoulders was gone, replaced by a quiet pride. He didn't speak as she sat beside him, but he handed her what he was carving. It was a small, intricately detailed bird, its wings outstretched as if taking flight. The craftsmanship was exquisite, a testament to the skill that had never left him. "A phoenix," he said, his voice raspy but steady. "For you." Isabella took the small wooden bird, its surface smooth and warm beneath her fingers. It was a symbol of the fun that had tried to destroy them, now reclaimed and reshaped into something beautiful, something born from the ashes. It wasn't justice in the form of a jail sentence or a public apology. It was this. It was the scent of pine shavings, the sound of her mother humming the weight of a law book, and the quiet dignity of a good man able to practice his craft once more. His honor restored by the daughter who had refused to let him be erased. That is the story of how a single sentence, spoken from a place of deep pain and quiet strength, shattered the gilded cage of power and privilege. It's a powerful reminder that the most formidable empires can have the most fragile foundations, and that sometimes the most potent weapon against injustice isn't a sword, but a memory held by someone who refuses to be silenced. Isabella's fight wasn't just for her family. It became a fight for every person who has ever been made to feel small, disposable, and forgotten by those in power. Her story shows us that one voice speaking the truth can echo with the force of 1,000. If this story of courage and consequence moved you, please take a moment to like this video and share it with others. Spreading stories like these is how we keep the conversation going. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more real-life dramas and tales of incredible resilience. Your support helps us to continue finding and telling the stories that matter. Thank you for listening.